Hello everyone, my name is Jason and I am an ISFP. You are watching my ISFP journey. Thank you for watching. In this video, I want to talk about intuition and sensing and how intuition and sensing work together. You cannot have sensing without intuition or vice versa. When people talk about sensors being whatever and intuitives being whatever, yes, it's true, we have dominant functions. We will favor sensing over intuition, or we will favor intuition over sensing. But the reality is we have both, and we use both. However, depending on whether or not you have extroverted sensing with introverted intuition, or extroverted intuition with introverted sensing in your main cognitive function stack, that is going to have an effect on what it looks like, how you use them, how you use your intuition function and how you use your sensing function, and also whether or not they are your first and fourth function or your second and third function. Those are going to make a pretty significant difference in how well you use them and how you balance them. So let's talk a little bit about each of those pairings: extroverted intuition with introverted sensing and extroverted sensing with introverted intuition. In both of these cases, what you have is you have a gathering function, a function that's the extroverted one of whichever of those two you have, is the gathering function that is taking in information. And then you have the narrowing function, that's the introverted, whichever one you have, introverted sensing or introverted intuition. And that's taking the gathered information and narrowing it down. And it is going to appear very different if you gather with intuition and narrow down with sensing than if you gather with sensing and narrow down with intuition. And it's really going to look different if you favor the introverted narrowing down function over the extroverted gathering function. Okay, so let's just dive in. Let's first talk about the ISFP, because that's what I am. So first of all, I have extroverted sensing and introverted intuition. And I have them as my second and third function, which means they're relatively balanced, contrasting that with an ESFP or an ESTP who has extroverted sensing as their first function and introverted intuition as their fourth function. That's going to be less balanced, okay? They're going to be weighing very heavily on the extroverted sensing side, and then they're going to be relatively weak on the introverted intuition side. But let's look at it from the balanced standpoint, or relatively balanced standpoint, that the ISFP has and wields these two functions. Extroverted sensing is going to be gathering in the data, gathering information. But in what realm is that information being gathered? Well, it's being gathered in the realm of sensing, or in other words, it's being gathered in the realm of the physical. So for the ISFP using extroverted sensing, and this would be true of the ISTP as well, our sensing is over our intuition, and it's our extroverted sensing that's first. So it's that gathering over that introverted narrowing down intuition function. So I am going to be gathering all of the information that I can, but from the physical world, not from the theoretical world, not from the abstract world. I'm gathering in data from the physical world. So I'm taking in the sights and the sounds. I'm seeing things. I'm exploring. I'm experiencing. I'm seeing what can be seen, hearing what can be heard, tasting what can be tasted, so on and so forth. I want to go out and explore and experience. I want to take in the information, all of the information that I can get, by actually hands-on, physically handling it. And then once I have taken in all of this sensory data, all of the details that I can gather from the physical world, I am then going to attempt with my introverted intuition to narrow that down to one what? With intuition, I'm using intuition here, I'm narrowing it down to one idea, to one concept. Now, everything in the world can't be narrowed down to one concept, but introverted intuition wants to narrow down as much as possible, okay? So I'm out here wanting to gather in the sensory data, and then narrow it down as much as possible to one idea, or an idea here that involves all of this data, and then another idea over here that involves all of this data. But I'm not interested in having a multitude of ideas. I'm interested in having a multitude of sensory physical data that I narrow down to as few categories, concepts, and ideas as possible. So I'll give you an example of this. My daughter, one of my daughters, my ISFP daughter, loves to dance. And she and I were having this conversation just the other day. She loves to dance, but she is obsessed with one type of dancing. And she wants to do that one type of dancing. And she wants to even try to do it through a specific means. There are multiple means of using this dance skill to become I don't want to say famous, but let's say to use it as an income, right? But she loves dancing, and she can take in all these different types of dancing and all these different ideas and watch all these people dance differently. But she narrows it down to one idea, a specific type of dancing, and then one particular avenue for using that skill to do something with it in the world. Okay? For me, I loved sports, but I wanted to narrow down on one sport, which was ice hockey. And then I wanted to narrow down on exactly what path I wanted to take to use that hockey to do something. Okay. So it wasn't just, here's an idea and here's an idea and here's an idea. No, it was, okay, give me all the sensory data in the physical world possible, and I will narrow it down to one idea. I'm not interested per se in keeping my ideological avenues open. I want to drill it down to one idea. That's SE, collecting the physical data, and NI, narrowing down to one idea. Now let's contrast that to what the INFP or the INTP is going to do, okay? Because they're going to have extroverted intuition and they're going to have introverted sensing. And they're not the only types that have extroverted intuition above introverted sensing, but they're the two types who have it in the middle, so it's more balanced as opposed to having it as first and fourth. So for the INFP and the INTP, they're more apt to want to gather in data. That's the extroverted. What? Gather in data from where? From what realm? The physical realm? No. Because they're using extroverted intuition. They want to gather in data from the abstract realm, the theoretical realm, or the realm of ideas. I'm over here wanting to see the sights and hear the sounds, and they're wanting to think the thoughts and ponder the concepts and the ideas. So they want many different ideas. They're not wanting to drill down on one idea. They're wanting to gather as many ideas as possible. And then over time, they can go through those ideas and, using their introverted sensing, categorize them down to what is the actual reality. So here's an idea, here's a thought, here's a concept, here's a theory. We're bringing it with extroverted intuition. They're bringing in all these different ideas and concepts and whatnot. And then they're drilling it down to, over time, and through analyzation of all of these ideas, to, but which idea is actually reality? What do I manifest into reality? How do all these ideas come together to actually form something in the physical world? The sensing, the introverted sensing, how do they come together to form something in the introverted sensing physical world? Okay. So that is a very different way of doing things. When my INFP wife is throwing out idea after idea after idea after idea, I'm overwhelmed because I want to narrow down on one idea. I don't want a bunch of ideas. But in order to narrow down on my one idea, I need to gather the data. Give me the sensing information. Give me the physical information. Okay. So if my wife's like, hey, there's a house, like if we're talking about moving, right? She could be like, hey, there's a house for sale over here. Oh, there's a house for sale over there. Oh, look, there's a house for sale here. And here's a house for sale. And I'm like, whoa. Let's go back to the first one. Give me all of the physical data about that house and how much does it cost. And I need to mull over, like, what would it take to actually move from this house to that house? I need to mull over all that data, and then I can drill that all the way down to, okay, that house is a consideration or it's not. Now we can move on to another one, because I need to go from lots of data down to one idea. My wife goes from lots of ideas down to one reality, let's say. Okay. Now, the great thing about this for the INFP, for the IPs, is that the those functions are in the middle, so they're pretty balanced. They work well together, which means that we can gather in data and make sense of it pretty well. For the EPs that have their extroverted gathering function, sensing or intuition, as their very first function, and then their narrowing down function as their very last function, their fourth function, they're not as balanced. So they're going to be gathering, but they're going to have a much more difficult time narrowing down onto one idea for the NI fourth, and inferior if you want to call it that, and for the, or narrowing it down to one reality for the SI fourth, all right? So that would be, like, for example, in ENFP, they're going to have extroverted intuition as their first function. So gather ideas. They're going to love to gather ideas. But with SI being their fourth function, they're going to have a harder time narrowing them down to one reality. For the ESFP and the ESTP, they're gonna be all about gather data, gather the physical world. Okay, go out and gather the physical world. Take in the physical as much as possible. Take in the world and all of the experiences and everything it has to offer. But then trying to take all of those little bits, different bits of data that they've gathered from all of their physical life experiences, and then drill those down and narrow them down into neatly organized ideas and concepts. That's going to be more difficult for them. It's something that I can do easier because I've got those my sensing and intuition in the middle. They're much more balanced, okay? Now, so where it's really going to be different is whenever we get over into the realm of the IJs and the EJs. And the reason that it's going to be very different for them is because they're going to have their narrowing down function ahead of, or they're going to favor their narrowing down function over their gathering function. And again, this is if they're just a typical run-of-the-mill, middle-of-the-road IJ or EJ. So the IJs and the EJs are going to have SI above NE, or they're going to have NI above SE. So they're going to want to narrow down, in a sense. It's not like everything happens in this perfectly, I always gather, then I organize. I always gather, then I organize. It's not, I mean, I'm an IP and I have gathering before organizing, but it's not as though I always do it in exactly that order. But as a general rule, I want to take in the data and then narrow it down. For the IJs and the EJs, they are narrowing down typically before they're gathering. And so that can even take things and put them even more on their head. Now, for me, I see that as backward. Now, I have never lived with an EJ's mind or an IJ's mind. For them, it probably makes perfect sense. But to me, it seems backward that they would narrow down before they gather. Okay, so that's going to look a little bit different. So let's just talk about, like, let's look at somebody like an ESTJ. Okay, so an ESTJ is going to have SI as their as their second function and NE as their third function. So they're going to be narrowed down right off the bat on a physical reality. They're going to be narrowed down on this is what is real, all right? But not necessarily because they've actually gathered the sensory data to back it up. I'm not saying that they never do, so please, ESTJs, don't hate on me. I'm just saying, as a general rule, they're going to have formulated their narrowed down ideology before they've actually gathered in the information. And then with their NE, they're going to gather in the ideas on the back end that sort of, in a way, support the SI narrowed down reality that they've already concluded is what they're dedicated to. And it would be the same way, like if you take an ENFJ, let's say. They're going to be narrowed down on an idea and be supportive of the idea, the one idea. This is their one idea that, I mean, they have lots of ideas, but in one realm. Let's just pick any one realm, okay? So they're dealing with one realm of thought, and they've narrowed it down to one idea. And then they're going to want to gather the sensory data to sort of back up the idea that they've already narrowed down on. Now, for me, this looks very backward, okay? To me, it makes sense to gather first and then narrow down on an idea. Whereas with the IJs and the EJs, they're more likely to narrow down on an idea or narrow down on a reality and then gather the data or the ideas that they need to back that up. Okay. Now, where this really goes kind of off the rails in a sense is with the IJs. Because with the EJs, even though it's a little bit backward in my mind, there's still their two middle functions, and so it's still relatively balanced. But whenever you put those functions on the far ends, first and fourth, so you look at let's take an ISFJ. Okay, so an ISFJ with SI as their first function is going to be all about narrowing down on a reality, narrowing down on this is the way things are, and this is the way things should be, and this is the way life should be structured, and so on and so forth. But then with that extroverted intuition as their fourth function, they're going to struggle to gather in the abstract ideas that will actually feed into that SI and sort of support it as being a real reality. Or with NI as a lead function, so like an INFJ or an INTJ, they are at risk. Again, I'm not saying like everybody does anything all the time. I'm just saying these are general concepts that can be true, that frequently are true, and that if we're not careful, we can fall victim to having unbalanced lives because of them. So for the INFJ or INTJ, you could have a situation where they've already narrowed down on one idea, and they're all in on one idea, but they don't, with the extroverted sensing as their inferior function, they've narrowed down on the idea first, and then they're not necessarily going out and gathering in the physical data to actually back up their idea. And this is going to come out in IJs in all sorts of, different ways. And all of these things, regardless of whether you have NE before SI or SI before NE, or SE before NI or NI before SE. And whether or not you have them in the middle, so they're relatively balanced, or on the poles, first and fourth function, so that they're relatively imbalanced, it's going to look a lot different for each person. But in every person, in every one of us, we are using both sensing and intuition. We are either gathering in ideas and narrowing them down to one reality, basically, or we're gathering in the physical data and narrowing it down to one idea. Or we could be narrowing in on one, this is the way life should be, and then gathering the ideas to support it, but maybe not doing it as well. Or for the EJs, still doing it pretty well. Or we could be gathering or narrowing down on one idea, and then for the EJs, a little bit better, gathering in the information in the physical world to support it, or for the IJs, maybe not gathering it in as well to support it. The sensing function that you have, introverted, extroverted, first, second, third, or fourth, will always go together with the with the intuition function that you have. Again, extroverted, introverted, first, second, third, or fourth. And they must work together so that you are able to take in information, be it from the physical world or the abstract ideological world, and then make sense of it and turn it into some usable, tangible concept or reality. Intuition and sensing. Partners, best friends, whatever you want to call it. You have them both. You may have S above N and therefore be classified as a sensor, but you still use intuition. Or you may be classified as an intuitive, but you still use sensing. Nobody is just an intuitive or a sensor. You are both. It's just that it comes out differently depending on which one's introverted, which one's extroverted, which one do you favor over the other, and are they your second and third functions so they're relatively balanced, or your first and fourth functions so they're relatively imbalanced. I hope this information is useful to you. If you found this video in any way useful, entertaining, whatever, please give it a like. Do please subscribe if you have not already. And if you have already subscribed, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate that. Thank you so much for watching. Have an awesome day. Bye now.